So looking at all this, we know how prepared he is to journey with us in this theme of today. And I request that we pay attention, and in case something may not be clear, or we may need to ask a question after, we'll have that chance because we have panel discussions. So let's put our hands together as we welcome Professor.
Okay. For this keynote address, I thought instead of taking a monographic theme, one theme and going deep into it, a kind of a flash highlights of what we call renewal of theology. It's also because the faculty of theology groups, we are going through what we call a renewal of second cycle. And in many places, such renewal is taking place. And therefore, I thought I would focus more on a general theme like renewal of theology and emerging themes in the church today. By emerging themes, I do not mean that they are completely new themes. They are themes which are already there. They have been there. And it does not mean, as Father Andreas said in his opening address, it is not that we completely reject the old one and we invent a completely new. No, it is not. It is a kind of a renewal in continuity. But I think he hit upon correctly saying that it is referring to responding to today. That's the key of the entire key address that I would like to focus on. So, to begin with, just a word about the institution, which I have already shared with you students yesterday and also with the staff. Namely, the Bosco Utume Salesian Theological College is now an affiliated institute of higher studies, and its latest statutes were approved in 2024. Operating under its own statutes and its own plan of studies, which are approved by the Holy See through the Dicastery for Culture and Education. And therefore, it has its own implications. An affiliated center has its own advantages, consequences, and other expectations. For example, as an affiliated college to the Faculty of Theology, its identity, vision, and mission go beyond being a simple major seminary. It remains a seminary where candidates to priesthood are being prepared. But it is not only a simple major seminary. Rather, it has become today an institute of higher education. It embraces theological study as a public and scientific discipline, open to dialogue with other sciences, and also responsive to the broader needs of the church and society today. And that's a real important distinction. It is recognized as an institute with public juridic personality, which is approved by the Holy See, which was not the case until now. Though your institution exists from 2010 in this form, but it is from now on, it has become a public juridical personality. And therefore, it is not an isolated religious house, but an active part of the universal church and the wider academic community, committed to holistic and credible formation of theological thought and ecclesial service. Its academic structure ensures mobility of students and teachers. People who have done their BTH here, they go to any ecclesiastical university, they have every right to begin their licentiate in theology, as I explained to you yesterday. And it also promotes mobility of teachers. The moment a teacher teaches in a particular affiliated center, he has the possibility to teach anywhere else. And if he goes to an aggregate center, it is all the more. And it also promotes inter-institutional collaboration. As an affiliated center or a college, it is not an isolated college. Rather, it is in collaboration with other similar institutions. And it also upholds certain theological and academic excellence. As I said, it consists mostly in giving a high quality theology. In a major seminary, one professor can teach 10 subjects, but it is not the case in an affiliated center. If you are teaching one discipline, you teach only that. Go deeper into it and bring the best to your students. And therefore, to fulfill its mission, it requires a permanent core of qualified professors, appropriate infrastructure like the library, and the regular contribution of highly competent visiting professors. I'll just hold on for a few seconds to explain this permanent professors. Permanent professor is one who has been chosen, has been prepared, and has been sent and set aside for this college with the priority of teaching, researching, and publishing. And he, as much as possible, he resides inside the institution or maybe in the nearby communities. But his main work is to teach, take part in the academic activities, accompany students at all levels, in all programs. And it is not that he just comes and teaches and goes and does something else outside. According to this Gaudium, which I am quoting now, a permanent professor is one who dedicates himself completely to teaching without assuming any other work which is incompatible with the teaching. You cannot be a permanent professor as well as the rector of a college outside. You can be a permanent professor and be the provincial of a province. It cannot be. So he's the one who, by the moderator of the institute, has been chosen, prepared, and set apart for this institution. And he dedicates his time and energy for this institution. That is the meaning of being a permanent professor. And an affiliate center should have every year, not only on paper, but in fact, 7 permanent professors. And the 7 must be from 7 different theological disciplines. 2 from dogmatic, 2 from scriptures, and from moral theology, and spiritual theology, pastoral theology, liturgies, canon law, and history of the church. All these professors must stay inside the house, if possible, or at least around the house. That is the meaning of an affiliated center. In the latest letter that the rector, Salesian Theological College, has written to the dean a few months ago, he was very categorically clear, and I have told all the staff yesterday. Namely that if at any time an affiliated or aggregated center is not able to guarantee that 7 in affiliated, 9 is a doctorate in an aggregated center, if they are not able to guarantee that, be courageous enough to not to renew their affiliation. Because you are bluffing in front of the Holy See. While approving the renewal, the Holy See gets a guarantee from the dean and the faculty that that affiliated center has the required professors. Otherwise, it will be a simple major seminary that's enough to prepare the candidates to teach. I think I purposely stayed on for a few seconds on this because this is the core of being an affiliated center. And Utume has become an affiliated center. And it is, I humbly request the moderator of the institute of the college and the staff members, especially the principal, to make sure that you remain truthful to what you promised at the time of asking for renewal. We do understand some here and there, some hiccups can take place, but that cannot be a permanent status, a situation of an institute. Now coming to the life itself of the Salesian Theological College, and therefore what are the governing documents that should actually guide the moment it is being affiliated. One is, as I said, that this Gaudium of 2017 of Pope Francis. It's a document that regulates ecclesiastical universities and faculties. Then there is an instruction called, which was published in 2020, which is supposed to bring in a more practical way, in a concrete way, all that is said in a generic way in this Gaudium. And whenever we apply for renewal, the Dicastery for Cultural Education, they literally apply every word in that document. And if you don't have it, they just send back the statutes. You must ask Father Dunstan how many times your statutes were sent back. It took more than 2 years for another center, I will not name it, another center to get the statutes approved because the statutes were not clear. And that instruction is a guiding, it's a small document, but it's a very clear document, especially saying who governs this institute. There should be a clear authority. And what is this academic council? Who are the professors? So So there are many concrete things which are mentioned, which becomes a guiding document for us. And thirdly, the statutes of the Salesian Pontifical University, because your statutes should correspond to ours, because it is an affiliating faculty. So in case of doubt in your statutes, in case of conflict, in case of lack of interpretation, the one that will give you guidelines is the statutes of the university. And the fourth one is statutes of the Salesian Theological College. These statutes approved by the Holy See are not meant to be kept in the archives. They are supposed to be, first of all, made known to the moderator, to the professors, and to the students. All should know what is written in the statutes. The statutes are the plan of studies. They give you the guidelines for running the institution. This does not mean that we are very dogmatic, very legalistic. No, it gives you certain stability. A college cannot be run according to the whims and fancy of the principal or the rector or the one professor or academic council. No, the student has got every right to receive what he claims to be as a part of an affiliated center. That's the meaning of it. And coming to our own talk today, the emerging documents, I would like to focus myself. I took most of the ideas from these four major documents which I already mentioned. We have done this doctrine, this instruction, and then there's another important document. I think it merits attention. Probably you should do an academic year. If you have not done last year, you must take up this document called Ave Theologia Promovendo, to promote theology. It's a very short, small document, but very clear. Most of the ideas that I'm going to give you today, they are taken from there. It gives you very good ideas. Finally, also I'm taking my ideas from the address that Pope Francis gave to us, participants, in an international congress that was held last year, month of December. Theologians and deans, they all gathered in the Vatican last year, and he gave us beautiful address. And I'm going to take some of the ideas from there also to share with you. So in the light of all these documents, what is the role and mission of theology? And the most important word is today. Theology today. These are the two key words of my topic. Okay. So what kind of theology does the church expect today? What are the characteristics of theological studies the church intends to promote today? For that, I would like to begin with actually Pope Francis, because these documents were done under the pontificate of Pope Francis. Very many times we have a wrong conception. Pope Francis was not a theologian and therefore blah 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 blah. It is not true. Most of the theological documents they appeared during his pontificate as a part of the renewal. So he used to speak of theology first and foremost as light. Light has got two qualities. Light is something that reveals. Something that reveals the world, its shapes, its forms, and ideas. But, second quality, without calling attention to itself. It illumines, but it is not at the center. I think theology is supposed to walk, a theologian is supposed to walk quietly, humbly, courageously, beautifully, revealing things, but not drawing attention to oneself. The theologian is not at the center. It is a theology of the truth. And the second one is theology as spirituality. A true theology is rooted in friendship with Christ and flows from love for the world which is marked by beauty as well as suffering. Therefore, theology is not merely an intellectual discipline, but a spiritual and human journey. Its strength comes from being grounded in grace and communion with God, who is the true source of all light, as we heard in the opening prayer. Thirdly, this may be your sister who is present here will be happy to hear this, the vital contribution of women in theology. As I mentioned to you yesterday, Pope Francis has repeatedly emphasized that women must be more fully involved in theological reflection and teaching. In fact, in his famous talk, he was citing the biblical episode of the prophetess Huldah, when everybody had that piece of material document to read and nobody was able to understand, this woman took that book of the law and interpreted it, when male people could not do it. So this episode illustrates that there are insights which only women can offer. And excluding them, excluding their voices, renders theology, according to Pope Francis, incomplete and deficient. He is very clear on that. Where we don't have the perspectives of women, we have only a theology which is incomplete and deficient. Therefore, the church must move forward. That's a renewal. Move forward to more inclusive theological practice, overcoming the long-standing dominance of an all-male perspective. And the fourth one is, theology is supposed to be helping us to rethink thinking. We have been thinking in a particular way. We need to reimagine theological thinking in a different way. We have to rethink how we think. The way we think shapes how we feel, how we decide, how we act. Therefore, theology must cultivate a broad, imaginative, and creative mindset that encourages depth, innovation, the courage to explore new perspectives and not just repeating what you already know. If you are not allowing theology to rethink, then it is possible that we land up in a theology which is closed, sterile, and disconnected from the real world. By the way, he also underlines, to overcome narrow thinking, theology must resist simplification, that it distorts complex realities, reduces them to ideological superficial slogans. Life is complex, and theology must take that into consideration. You don't have one solution for everybody, for all situations. Theology must encourage, therefore, must engage with philosophy, science, arts, literature, economics, and more, allowing mutual enrichment of knowledge. And the final one is, theology is supposed to be a companion in adult faith and midlife renewal. Pope Francis has observed a growing interest among adults, especially those in middle age, who are returning to theological study and faith formation. This is a state of life often marked by professional stability, but also existential questioning and even crisis, which creates a desire for renewal and deeper meaning. Of late, in the Faculty of Theology, we have almost every year 3 or 4 people, men and women, who are retired. And at that old age, they would like to come and study theology. And because they cannot study the entire theology, they choose some subjects. And mostly they choose sacred scripture. Once a week, they come and attend and they listen to the class. And I ask them while I'm meeting them, why you want to study at this age instead of sitting at home? No, we never had a chance to deepen our faith. And therefore, it's good that we had that chance. I was sharing with the professors yesterday how there was one man who came to as a guest student to study. And I asked him, why do you study? It's because my niece and nephews that was always seeing me studying religion books, they sponsored my studies to study theology. So there is a return on the part of the laity to have more depth in their Christian theological thinking. And therefore, such openness demands a pastoral creativity and flexibility. Institutions must imagine new forms of teaching, course structures, and learning environments, ensuring that theology is not reserved for specialists like seminarians and religious, but it is available to all who seek to deepen their faith and understand their lives in light of the gospel. This is one of the emerging trends that we have, as far as I know, in the West. It is that many lay people are thirsting for more knowledge of Christian faith. So this is with regard to the first part, with regard to the Pope Francis' understanding of theology. In the light of all this, I will rapidly now go through 8 points on what kind of emerging trends, what are the emerging trends that we have today, and what kind of theology we need today. One is a prophetic theology. Theology must not merely repeat past formulas, but actively interpret today's challenges in the light of Revelation. Because we are living in an age of profound transformation. Remember those famous words of Pope Francis. What we are living through is not simply an age of change, but a change of epoch. and theology must take this into consideration. It is called to read the signs of the times and offer new direction for the future. We also know from history how history demonstrates that throughout the centuries, the role of theology has undergone drastic changes. And therefore, renewing theology according to our times is nothing wrong. Rather, it is a need of the day. In practical terms, theology must renew its language, symbols, and methods to respond meaningfully to current questions in society, culture, and science. That's the first characteristic. The second one is theology is called to be mission-oriented, an outgoing theology. This is a very famous phrase of Pope Francis, Theologia in Uscita, the outgoing theology. That is, a theology must engage with the peripheries of society. It cannot simply remain closed to the seminaries. It must engage with the existential peripheries. While addressing the Grand Chancellor of the Catholic University of Argentina, Pope Francis wrote, "Do not be satisfied with the desk theology. Let your place of reflection be the frontiers." Good theologians, like good pastors, also smell of the people. They have the smell of the people and the street. And by their reflection, they pour oil and wine on the wounds of men. So, openness to the world with all its problems, wounds, and challenges and potential urges theology today to an epistemological and methodological rethinking. This calls for a theology which is deeply rooted in life and not detached from it. A new paradigm, therefore, is required, a shift from static universal abstractions to contextual incarnational reflection. We need fundamentally contextual theology. And the model that is presented is the incarnation itself. Theology must enter into dialogue with the cultures, languages, and worldviews of each people. And the third characteristic is theology must be dialogical and relational. Theology must foster dialogue across boundaries between traditions, faith, disciplines, and worldviews. Dialogue is not optional anymore. It is intrinsic to the human condition and creation itself, which reflects a web of relationship. Everything is connected, as Pope Francis would put it in Laudato Si. Theologically, this rootedness, this dialogue, this relationality is rooted in the Trinitarian nature of God itself. Theology must mirror this relational structure and not remain isolated. And the fourth one is, it is a new catchy word that is being pronounced everywhere, transdisciplinary approach to theology. Theology must go beyond multidisciplinarity to transdisciplinarity. What is the difference? A multidisciplinarity promotes a better understanding of something, but from multiple points of view. But they all remain separate and they remain complementary. But a transdisciplinarity does not remain coexisting, but it should be thought of as the placement and fermentation of all knowledge within that space of light and life offered by the wisdom that emanates from God's revelation. That everything must merge and not remain isolated. And therefore, the task of theology is to utilize new categories developed by other disciplines to penetrate and communicate the truths of faith and to transmit the teaching of Jesus in today's languages with originality and critical awareness. And another characteristic is what we heard in the prayer also. Theology must become part of ecclesial and synodal practice. In spite of all the difficulties that we have with regard to the word synodal, and still many people are interpreting it in different ways, we really do not know exactly what it's all about. But still, theology must engage in a synodal practice. That is, it should be done within the synodal life of the church, marked by communion, participation, and mission. Theologians must embody and model fraternity, shared discernment, and not isolated academic pursuit. Institutions should provide spaces for theological collegiality, where diverse voices are heard and integrated. Even among students at their own level, opportunities must be given so that they can express their theological ideas. All of them may not be mature, all of them may not be correct. but we have to give them an opportunity to express and to transform, to become mature, to correct them also. I was told by Father Dunstan that this keynote address is for 45 minutes. Yeah? So I am remaining faithful to that. And the sixth characteristic is sapiential and spiritual. And this is probably a theme that keeps being repeated in today's context. Theology must not be reduced to cold rationalism or academic detachment. It is also wisdom, rooted in the Spirit. It implies a theology that is deeply prayerful, humble, and oriented toward transformation, both personal and communal. It is a transcendent knowledge, and at the same time attentive to the voice of the people. And therefore, the so-called popular theology mercifully addressed the open wounds of humanity and creation, and within the folds of human history, to which it prophesies the hope of an ultimate fulfillment, should be part of theology. We should not dismiss popular theology as if it is of a second-grade theology. People have something to say. And that connects us to the next characteristic, namely inductive and pastoral. Theology should today, we ask, use more and more an inductive method, beginning from people's lives, their stories, their questions, their suffering. It implies allowing theology to be seriously challenged by reality in which theology is inserted. The goal of theology is not to impose truths abstractly, but to preserve God's presence in history, especially the voices of ordinary people. In this way, the knowledge of people's common sense becomes a privileged theological place. This makes theology a pastoral practice at the service of the church's mission. As Pope Francis used to say often, theology should have a pastoral stamp. It should be for the people. And coming towards the end, the eighth one is evangelizing and inculturated theology. That is, theology must serve evangelization by helping faith become culture, a lived, wise ethos shaping human behavior and values. In this way, popular religiosity and the sensus fidei, they become valuable theological resources. Theologians must pay attention to this, and sometimes even to the distorted image of God and the church among people, which are found in such movements, and to represent Christian God as love, mercy, and justice. Theology must remain scientifically serious and methodologically sound, while being imaginative, creative, and dialogical. These are the 8 emerging trends that I have taken from the recent the documents that speak about theological studies. I would like to conclude with 2 important ideas, since quite practically all of them who are here are people who belong to consecrated life. And I would like to emphasize on the importance of study even for consecrated people. For religious and priests, as we know, study is seen as part of life in the Spirit. It's a form of asceticism, a path to wisdom. It is not just for intellectual development. It is not for a degree. It is not to get a diploma at the end. But it is for spiritual discernment, understanding God's presence in today's history, and proclaiming the gospel with depth and credibility today. And that requires theological studies. Today's secular culture often questions the meaning of consecrated life. Many are wondering why you are becoming priest. Study helps reaffirm the prophetic role of consecrated life and articulate its cultural and spiritual significance. Evangelizing a world shaped by secular ideologies and new technologies demands deep intellectual formation. Through reflection and cultural engagement, consecrated people can be leaven in the world, inserting what is new from Christ and critically engaging what is harmful. And therefore, a serious, profound theological formation is today an essential aspect of consecrated life. The neglect of study, on the other hand, will only lead to superficiality, poor evangelization, and diminished relevance in today's society. And the last one word, being a Salesian Theological College, one word for the Salesians. I think we have forgotten an important document written by one of the rector majors, Don Juan Ricky, in 1997. The title of that letter that he wrote to the whole congregation is, "For You I Study." Satisfactory preparation of the conference and the quality of our education, mind you, they are in the 90s, late 90s. And there he presented, first of all, a study in general, not only theology, any study, as a core element of Salesian mission and identity. The famous phrase of Don Bosco, "For You I Study," expresses a deep pastoral and educational commitment. It highlights study not as an academic luxury, but as an essential form of loving service to the young. It is an act of charity. And that takes us to the second point in this letter, study as a form of pastoral charity. Studying enables the Salesians, and actually for all the religious, to better understand the youth, respond to contemporary challenges, communicate faith meaningfully, which means it requires time, reflection, spaces for prayer, solitude, research, activities which were, as we know, integral to life of Don Bosco. You will know he was very busy. He always had time for personal reflection and reading, and he wrote so many small books. Therefore, that's a vital connection between charity, pastoral charity, and competence. Thirdly, the Salesians' role in the shared mission. Today, Salesians work in shared responsibility with lay people, and their role increasingly involves leadership, guidance, and formation of others. This requires not only pastoral zeal, but also solid theological, pedagogical, and cultural grounding. We will not be able to animate, evangelize, collaborate with lay people unless we are prepared for it. This is to overcome what Pope Francis has always denounced, clericalism. Church is not made up of clerics, of priests and religious. The majority of them are lay people. And therefore, their participation in the mission of the church is essential, and the clergy must learn to walk with them, and not always on top of them. Sometimes we also need to obey them, if that is necessary. Finally, the demand for all this requires naturally a demand for qualified personnel. Effective educational ministry today requires high levels of professionalism, cultural intelligence, and adaptability. Inculturation, updating methods, and context-specific responses are today essential for effectively reaching young people. We cannot reach young people of today with old methods. Some of the old methods still have their relevance, but today young people are completely another generation, and we need to equip ourselves. New fields like higher education, publication, social communication, disadvantaged youth, in cultural ministry, all these demand highly prepared personnel. Superficial qualifications or lack of reflection can undermine the credibility and effectiveness of Salesian mission. Therefore, I conclude saying study, including theological study, must be seen as a missionary love. Remember the words of Don Bosco, study and piety will make you a true Salesian. Culture and spirituality are two inseparable dimensions of being a true educator and pastor today. Study is not marginal, it is not optional. It is a vital condition for living out a Salesian religious pastoral charity today. It is in this sense, in a fast-changing world, study becomes service, enabling Salesians to be discerning, prophetic, and effective witnesses of Christ's love among the young. As I conclude, I really sincerely thank my fellow theologians, professors, and the teachers for your work, which is often hidden, often unrecognized, often calling for selfless sacrifice. We do it because we have been called to transmit what we have received and inflict upon, for the good of the church and for the good of the world. And I wish you all the best for this new academic year.
Okay, that is one of the 3 questions of the first round. So we welcome 2 questions from the floor. Yes, kindly give the microphone to you. Raise your hand. Oh, okay, 1, 2. Thank you.
You must give some seconds to think. I'm not a chat GPT. Okay, taking the first question, it is correct, Professor, that these trends on the one hand are new in their form, in their perspective, in their insistence, and that calls for a new paradigm shift. It is, and one of the simple examples would be that traditionally theology is very deductive method. You have the eternal truths which must be converted into practical realities. Today there is a call for a new paradigm shift, moving from taking an inductive method, citing for people's lives, citing for you, including life of Jesus. Because if you understand and analyze the way Jesus taught, it was not coming from a deductive method, it was an inductive method. So that's just one simple example of showing how these emerging trends are practically in response to emerging new challenges. And in every epoch, theology has always responded to those challenges in a way that was comprehensible to them. And today, if we want to respond, if theology must remain relevant today, it has to know, read, scrutinize what is happening in the world. And that we find in the famous number 4 of Gaudium Spes. It is the constant mission of the church to scrutinize the signs of the times in the light of the gospel. And that gives the key. And Pope Francis, as you know, is very well rooted in the Vatican II. And therefore, this paradigm shift is not completely new, but probably it is going back to what theology is supposed to be, and not what it has become, an isolated, self-closed, privileged subject for a few. Rather, it's supposed to be accessible to all, open to all, it should illumine all. And in a way, all need to participate in clearing it. And that comes to the second question, the sources of theology. Naturally, a contextual theology in Africa must explore its resources, original resources which are easily understandable. I saw during the Holy Mass, I was distracted by the way across the panels in the church, where you find Jesus, his life, his Calvary, his journey to Calvary depicted in an African way, which I never saw anywhere else. And I was happy to see that. And that is what we call new cultural theology. While your singing was so enthusiastic, lot of life, swinging from the beginning, and whenever you sing, you swing, and that is typically of this place. But to some extent, I was not so happy to see such a Roman liturgy with all the Roman dress and movements, more Roman than the Romans themselves. So, an inculturated theology requires a response to reading, knowing what is in a particular culture. But I always insist, from my personal opinion, that no culture is perfect. Every culture is subject to evolution. In every culture, there are values and there are anti-values. And a culture is always open to engagement. A culture that does not dialogue with another culture, it will die by itself. Or rather, it will do a lot of harm to the people who follow that culture. So while a culture is that gives identity to us, a culture must also be open, dialogue. It must enter into other relations, purifying its own unwanted elements. Some of the anti-values in a culture have been brought by some people at a particular time that need not respect. I'm sorry to say, I hope you don't get offended. If I were to say, some people in the West, they think, oh, Africans, when they speak, they are very aggressive. In the spiritual direction, they have a problem. So I had to tell one rector of our seminary, no, it is not that they are aggressive. That is the way of speaking. If you go to a fisherman community, where when they speak loud. You'll be thinking that they are fighting. They are not fighting, they are just speaking. To get to know your resources, you need to get back to your resources, but at the same time, be critical. In theology, contextual theology, if you are referring to Africa, it must use the best of its culture, the best of its traditions, and the best that you have in your own way of thinking, without being isolated. That's one risk that contextual theology always has, being isolated from the rest of the world. If God has created one human family, there's something that unites all of us, that they are human beings. And the third one, coming to women insight. One of those women insights that Prophet Francis is talking about. I suppose in your modern theology, you will come to know, if you are studied it, there are certain moral intuitions which men don't have. It's a simple fact. We don't have. And there are certain intuitions that women have and men don't have, which men have and women don't have. It's a fact, it's a psychology that tells us it is their children, their brain structure is made like that. And there are numerous studies that have been done to prove this point. It is not purely Pope Francis said it, no. It's a scientific evidence. We have scientific researches which tells us that we need a women contribution to come to a complete, as it happens in a family. If the whole family is dominated only by the father, naturally that family misses the contribution of the mother, that feminine aspect. Though it sometimes now, in the name of feminism, we are not the extreme, but that does not mean that we should not take the feminine perspective. They have something to teach. God has not created only men to dominate. God has created male and female. And He has created male and female in His own image and likeness. We need to get back to the scriptures, basics. And therefore there are moral intuitions which women have to contribute. In theological circles, the way they look at God may not be the same as the way that men look at God. You can say, for example, women religious, they call Jesus my holy spouse. Can you men religious say that? Jesus is my holy spouse. You may consider homosexual. That is their language. And if you speak that, if they use the language, they understand, which you don't understand as well. So just to give a simple example, there are many, especially since I belong to moral theology, there are many examples to prove that if you don't listen to them, you miss something fundamentally essential. You miss it out. It is by interacting with them, listening to them, allowing them to speak, you will come to know how much we have been lacking so far and how much we need to take in. After all, God became man through a woman. I am aware that my response may not be very direct and deep because questions were asked just like that, and therefore my answers also will be only to that extent. With regard to renewed theology, for example, you are quoting the context of war. Traditionally, the question of war, for example, has been defended by the famous just war theory. Today, a renewed theology would say there is no war which is just. It doesn't exist. Okay. But a just war theory was born in a particular context. And the conditions that make up a just war theory, for example, it evolved in the centuries until we have reached today, where you also have another new condition which was not there in the traditional just war theory, like rebuilding a destroyed country, which was not there in the traditional just war theory. The renewed theology, this for example, calls for paying attention to it. For centuries we had a theory which never even bothered about what you should do after the war. Use post-Bible. what you're supposed to do after the war. When do you say a war is over? When two people shake hands? When two leaders shake hands? Or a new theological theology of war, theology of peace would ask for a real war comes to an end when an invading country rebuilds the country that it invaded and destroyed. It's a condition that is required by the just war theory, which keeps evolving. And therefore, renewed theology, if you apply it to many cases, it is a question of placing the right perspective according to present needs, present times. If you go back to the Bible, as often it is said that the Old Testament is full of episodes of war and violence compared to the New Testament. Does that mean we should not read the Old Testament? Or should we reinterpret it according to our present context? I have had one conference in my community. Whenever we have the feast day morning prayer, there is the third psalm. What is the third psalm for the any feast day? Psalms of Sunday. Let's sing a new hymn to the Lord. Sing a new song to the Lord. And then we recite it very peacefully. Okay? But then towards the end of that psalm, there is a word like this. You have the word of God on your lips and a two-edged sword in your hand to destroy your enemies, bind their enemies in chains, in the fetters of iron. For this let us glorify the Lord. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit. Now there is a conference in the community, as I was saying. When we recite the psalm, he simply does not recite that psalm. He doesn't recite. He skips. And he argues, saying, no, this is not the word of God. The renewed theology calls for reinterpreting. So you can't simply pick and choose from the Bible. This is word of God and this is not word of God. The entire thing is inspired. And so we need a reinterpretation of the Bible in many instances. And that's one of the things I think would be kind of a renewed theology. We cannot very peacefully accept certain psalms, but we can remove many psalms from our daily breviary prayer because of the new sensibility that we have. And that is also part of renewed theology. And the second one is a cold rationalism. By cold rationalism, I mean that kind of a theology which the one who teaches does not know, and one who listens also does not know. But he teaches it. And he's very systematic and he's very clear. But it doesn't affect your life. I was reminded of my professor of mystery of faith. He used to tell us how, at one moment, there was an old lady after the Mass of the Holy Trinity. She went and told the parish priest who was celebrating us, Father, fantastic. The celebration was wonderful. And your sermon on the Holy Trinity was really inspired. I was moved by that. Only one thing I was not very clear. You are talking about the procession, no? That the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and from the Son. Okay? Or from the Father through the Son, with all the emphasis. And she said, the only thing I didn't understand was, at what time is the procession? At what time is the procession? That's an example of cold rationalism. That you speak about the Holy Trinity and people don't understand. While the Holy Trinity is supposed to be easy to explain. But if you contain them in a very highly closed formulas, it will remain cold. It doesn't warm people for transformation of life. That's what I mean by that. And also by inductive, it simply means start from life. Start from life. Be sensitive to life. Be sensitive to people, the questions that people ask. Why do you go for your pastoral ministry? Do you go only to help or to learn? You listen to listen to the way people speak, what they experience, and that makes you think when you come back to study. Otherwise it becomes a weekend ministry. It's not a weekend ministry, it's a pastoral ministry. But as a pastor, you listen to people. And that's what we mean by an inductive method, which has been there, not that it has never been there. But especially Catholic social teaching from the time of Vatican II, there has been more emphasis on inductive theology, which has what is known as historical consciousness and not abstract formation. We are not giving up those formations. We are not giving up those doctrines. They are essential. They are part of our faith. But the way we understand, the way we communicate matters a lot. And thirdly, the faith and culture. I think that's an interesting question. And one of the ways that Pope Francis has always tried to instill is how faith becomes culture. Faith becomes part of our living. Faith is not something that is limited to the celebration of the Mass or some prayers. Faith enters into life. And that meaning, it becomes a culture. It's a way of perceiving, the way of seeing, the way of evaluating, the way of living. That's our culture. We're not conditioned by our culture. How a Christian faith illumines our culture. It becomes almost a culture. It becomes a way of living. And that needs a lot of time to explain more. And finally, the new methodology of teaching. Not that we completely change the methodology of teaching theology. It remains basically the same. But today, psychologists would insist more on student-centered didactics, student-centered teaching. It is not the role of the teacher to just communicate casually what he knows, what he has studied, what he has researched, but making the student involved. Even if he does not have the correct, mature, complete understanding, let him speak. Clarify with him. Of course, that will change according to various levels. With the doctoral students, you can do that. With the licensed students, you can do it less. With the bachelor's degree, it is basically, there are what is known as institutional courses, where you come to know the basics of Christian theology, where there is not much possibilities for dialogue, but wherever it is possible, like the seminars, like a theological synthesis, or moments that the students themselves create to come together, to share their ideas. These are the moments where the student is at the center of teaching. Because teaching is always for the student, not for the teacher. But the teacher also learns from students. The questions that you ask, the questions that the students ask, sometimes the professor answers immediately with some answer, but you will go back and reflect on it. If it's an intelligent question, it makes the professor think. And we also as professors learn from students. And therefore the new methodology consists of making the student the center of learning and not the teacher. I know that I have not fully answered your questions, but these are some of the answers for your questions. Okay.
So we have, for want of time, 5 minutes, but we just have only one question since Deacon had raised his hand.
Naturally, when you want to engage in a kind of inclusive perspective of life, perspective of faith, it requires time to change. In some cultures, such changes are accepted quite fast. In some other cultures, the acceptance of that kind of inclusiveness, it takes time. It is not their one is better than the other. It simply is part of their cultural way of understanding. And therefore, even the gender inclusion, or people who are traditionally considered as people who should be burnt alive, or you have in one of the countries here in the African continent, you have to denounce certain behavior, because you also can be arrested. So every culture goes through a kind of an evolution. And faith acceptance of faith, accepting the faith also involves deeply culture. Culturally, our culture conditions our way of accepting the Christian faith. And that's a fact. And therefore, the renewed theology calls for constant insistence on inclusiveness. In the church, we have suffered from certain level of exclusion. And that's the clear sign of that exclusion is clericalism. That we have seen ordination as power and not as a service. And that power must remain only for some people and not for all. So if you take many areas of life and teachings, we have evolved. The theology is life, and anything that has life, it will change. Anything that does not change does not have life. And therefore, inclusiveness is part of the work. And with regard to certain issues, the church is rather slow. It's only because once it pronounces something, it becomes an important truth. and church cannot eat its words. And that's the reason why generally it is slow in embracing anything new. But of late we have seen that inclusiveness has come in a very fast manner in some parts of the world. In some other parts of the world, there's a lot of resistance, and you know what happened also to the document Felicius Supplicus, okay, in which part of the world that so much of resistance and open criticism came from. And that is a deeply cultural center. We are here to discuss that, but the idea is any change, any radical change requires time. And the inclusiveness of certain things requires time. And if you read Amos Letizia, the 8th chapter, and you find that how do you integrate people who are separated, divorced, and remarried? Early theology would say just burn them all in public square. Today you can't do that. Today you can't do that. So that's a change, that's inclusiveness. They are also people of God. They are not just irregular, they are fragile people. So how to include fragility into a theology? And that requires for a new way of thinking theology. Theology is not simply black and white. There are many gray areas in life. Life is complex. So that's one thing. Secondly, in the western part of the world, the church is losing its credibility because of secularism. But thank God, in many other parts of the world, secularism has not completely destroyed Christian faith. And therefore the church is flourishing like what you have here. That's an interesting thing. Crisis of vocation is a very big issue. I don't think I will answer it in a few sentences. Crisis of vocation, you can look at it a different way. Just because you don't have a vocation to priesthood, the church is suffering from crisis of vocation. Maybe it's a call to think of vocation in a different way. It's not only the priests and religious who have vocations. Every Christian has a vocation. Every Christian is a priest. But there is a ministerial priesthood. Vocation cannot be equated to ministerial priesthood. And right from the beginning of the church, we have had moments which are different from what we have. So, in some parts of the world, like in the continent of Africa, God is blessing us, blessing you with many vocations to priesthood and to consecrate life. Let us thank God for it. We take care of them, we nourish them, and we send them as missionaries. Once Africa received missionaries, today Africa has to send missionaries. Earlier Asia received missionaries. Now today Asia sends missionaries all over the world. Life is a circle. The Holy Spirit flows where you is. And therefore, I think the crisis of vocation is a serious one, but it needs to be an open pursuit, and not in a narrow manner. We need to look at vocations. Even when there are no priests, the church will continue to live in different ways, different forms, as the Holy Spirit is planned. We will never know. And therefore, we will continue to nourish it, grow, help to grow, but we also need to be open to various ways in which the Holy Spirit is telling us, no, found other vocations. There are many other vocations that we need to form, not only priestly, religious vocations. So, some of these emerging trends are trends which call us fundamentally coming to the conclusion. The essence is, let your theology start from life. Let it go back to life. And to start from life, to go back to life, we need theology. Theology is still relevant, and we need to know it. We cannot simply only know the Bible and go preach, as many Protestants do. No, life is more complex. God's revelation is much greater, and therefore we open ourselves, leave ourselves open, read. And that's why we used to constantly say after Vatican II, every priest should read the Bible and read the newspaper every day. On the one hand the Bible, on the other hand the newspaper. To know what's happening in the world, what God is speaking to us through what is happening in the world, and including what is happening with God's word. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor, for all the knowledge you have given to us. church is taking towards this inductive theology. And being an institution which prepares people for ministry, I think we've been touched in a special way by this keynote address of today. The reflections given to us about doing a new theology are deep, and they need reflection, unpacking each one of them, because each one of them, as they have come, needs unpacking. And as we continue to reflect on them, I think we shall have your keynote address given to us, so that we may go on to see that we reflect, meanwhile doing our theology and living our theology. Thank you very much.
To join Father Robert in also acknowledging and really truly thanking Professor Sahadas for his thoughtful. I had a completely different idea, and I'm just touched by the fact that Father has not brought things from here and there. He has consulted documents. He has based his input on documents that are very central to the church in our times. If we are to listen to the church, reason with the church, and reason with the church. So I want to thank you, Professor, and I also acknowledge you are challenged in so many ways by this input. We shall pick up these ideas along the way as we continue with our academic year, make more reflections, and see that we are at least inculcating them in our